Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Dealmakers Conversations, where we sit down with M&A minded business leaders to talk about how they run their organizations and their thoughts on deal making. In this segment, we sit down with Bill Goggins, CEO of Harken. Now, you may know them from their world-class sales they make for boats, but do you really know about this hidden gem in the region and what they're doing now? Bill, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you having you here at Dealmakers.
Thanks, Dustin. Glad to be here.
So, Bill, let's talk a little bit about the company. In 2019, you led an employee buyout of Harken from the family that owned it. What spurred that deal, and why did they decide it was time to sell?
It's a natural story in some ways. Harken it was built by two brothers, founded back in '67. And so as classic entrepreneurs, they ran things the way they wanted and they did things right. And it just became apparent at the stage where they were in their lives that they started looking. They had been recruited by many suitors for a long time, and they had said no quite often. But they got to a stage where they were ready to pay it forward. And so it was really a natural succession plan based on owners' age and their wishes to keep things in-house.
It makes a lot of sense. I understand they explored several different liquidity options and exit options before landing on an employee buyout in the form of an ESOP. Why was an ESOP the best option?
Well, yeah, to answer that, let me give you some background about the company. As I'd said, built, kind of from the ground up with two brothers, sweat equity, and they've always treated all of the employees at this company like their extended family. And amazing brothers. They were born in Indonesia, raised in the Philippines, and then end up in Pewaukee, Wisconsin, making yacht equipment that gets used by America's Cup sailors and Olympians all around the world. Peter Harken jokes, I've had a very normal childhood, normal life. And clearly that kind of built inside of the culture of the business, something that was really tied back to giving back to the company. The Harken family have always been very humble and of service to the customers and to our employees. And so after a lot of different options that came across the table over the years, this one just seemed the most natural and the best fit. And I really pay, the credit to the Harken family, as a whole. Their priorities were, in my opinion, pure and for what was best for the organization. There's probably other liquidity events that could have been more attractive. And some of the other options that we had, were unique and interesting that had come across the table. But to get to your question, as I'd said, we're a pretty attractive business to a lot of our clients. I think the most special thing about Harken is we've got the coolest customers in the world. And we were talking high net worth individuals and Olympic athletes and America's Cup sailors, all of whom are at play, with racing yachts, and they expect the best, and they hopefully get that from Harken, humble service. And so interestingly, we've had customers come to us say, why don't we buy you and we can fold you into our bigger organization? And, all of that sounds good on paper, but when it comes back to taking the organization and getting us to where we want to go from where we've been, we feel like we can do a better job to be of service and take care of it ourselves. So the ESOP just kind of became a natural conclusion after a lot of work of considering other options. And long story short, it was just sort of this natural conclusion and transition that we were able to create.
So how was the asset purchase financed in terms of putting that together?
Yep. I mean, as a deal goes, it's a leveraged transaction, but we had a very healthy balance sheet coming into it. And so some of it was cash from the balance sheet. We've got senior debt. We've got a terrific relationship with our bankers at Wells Fargo. And then there's seller financing too. And as you're familiar with ESOP transactions, there's a lot of benefits that make the deal attractive from a tax efficiency perspective for the sellers and for us as the managers running the business going forward in a tax-free environment. So that allowed the deal to be competitive, and the negotiations with the trustee were earnest, and I think the results were very good. So with that came a reasonable sale price, buy price, depending on what side you're on. And we feel as though the way the business is established right now, we've got a good cash flow arrangement to really make this work. So we're really excited.
One of the things that I've seen since you went ahead and became an ESOP is that you've been on a very aggressive acquisition strategy for growth. Why now, and what opportunities have you seen that maybe the previous owners either didn't see or didn't have the opportunities to jump on?
Yeah, well, Dustin, I certainly don't want to take claim as this was a pure new concept for Harken of some acquisitional growth. But I mean, as a company, when you look at our history, 5 decades plus, we've made some acquisitions, and uniquely, most of the investments in the business through acquisitional growth have been in recessions. And 87, we bought what is now Harken, Italy, which is our secondary factory. It's between Milan and the Swiss border. And then beyond that, we just recently, I've been with the company 21 years. When I started with helping acquire distributors that became parts of our subsidiaries with the team. And so we bought on UK, Australia, New Zealand, and then we started up some distribution of Poland and Sweden. But the recent growth through acquisition came from good timing, really. I mean, one of them was a big distributor of ours in Holland, and they were looking for a succession plan. So it bolted on quite nicely, and it's a good margin play. And then we had 2 other acquisitions in the last year through a diversification strategy. So we're not just in the yachting business, we're also in a safety and a rescue business. So we bought a company in Chicago called Elevated Safety, and then we bought another company in Sandpoint, Idaho, known as Cascade Rescue. You might be familiar with it. They make the orange toboggans that you would have to ride down if you broke your leg skiing. Okay, so that's a new business, and it's just good timing. And what's really I think the important part of the strategy for us is we've enjoyed organic growth, slow and steady over time. And now we're seeing, our eyes are open that, true accretive acquisitions really can amplify a strong company and make it even stronger.
Absolutely. And, the most recent deals, you did some of this during COVID. How did you put together the due diligence process and get to know those companies in such a way that you were able to integrate them in the middle of a global pandemic?
Sure. First thing and foremost is full credit to our C team. John Jensen, who's our CFO, and Matt Malik, who's our COO. They're A gamers. They've done an amazing job both on the so-and-so sell side and the buy side of just getting to the data, what we need. And, when it comes to the organic and soft side of due diligence, these acquisitions came relatively naturally to us because the people that joined Harken in acquisition were sort of cut from our cloth. Okay, so that part kind of came naturally. But when it came to the X's and O's of the transaction, we worked with partners. BDO's a partner of ours. They've created structure for us when it came to preparing for the ESOP, and then for the acquisitions. One of these transactions being in Holland. There's an international component, working with all of the different partners that we have good relationships with. It just created it was a hard job, of course, but it was a successful effort, just getting about our business and getting the data, and it all worked out quite well.
Did you fund these organically from within, or did you finance these externally with some different capital stacks?
Yeah, these in terms of size, 2 of the 3 were relatively small, so we funded them ourselves. And then the third one kind of built into the capital stack that we've got with the ESOP transaction. So it all worked together. And that was one of the things that was kind of a unique puzzle. So we were about to close on our ESOP transaction, and then this little thing called COVID arrived. And so we decided to hit the pause button for a minute. Our factory in Italy had been shut down for 8 weeks. And so, in earnest and in good spirit, we all decided, let's get back to some sort of stability. We've been fortunate to see a real, true, honest V-shaped recovery in the business. And so, getting to that really allowed us to, get it all in place. But then when it came to banking, all of those things, it really required a confident business plan, which we've got. The bankers, I think looked at that, the trustee looked at that, and the sellers of the businesses that we bought, we all just had very direct, simple, honest conversations, and we made it happen.
So in what ways do these new acquisitions help position the company for growth, Bill?
Well, Yeah, I think if there's a closing statement I'd like to make, it would be something along the lines of, our eyes are open. We're not, specialist deal guys like you'll have in this room, but we recognize that growth can come from things other than just designing a better product. We still believe that innovation is our driver, but acquiring businesses and making our family stronger and bigger, it's a real pathway. And I'm certain that as we go, this is going to be part of our growth strategy.
Excellent. Well, Bill, I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your thoughts on what's going on over at Harkin. Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you, Bill. That was exceptional. Next up, Julia Taylor, president of the Greater Milwaukee Committee. She shares her thoughts on how to supercharge the regional economy and what her group is doing to help advocate for talent and economic growth. Julia, thanks for joining us today.
Great. It's welcome. I'm really glad to be here with you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we appreciate it. From your perspective, let's talk a little bit about Milwaukee. What are some of the greatest opportunities for economic growth in the greater Milwaukee region?
Well, I think actually, this past year, I think has shown some of those opportunities for growth. A lot of people have come together around the issue of racial equity and disparity and how we start to change that, which impacts a lot of opportunities for economic growth in Milwaukee. And I think even dealing with the pandemic has kind of shown us where our weaknesses are and our strengths are as a community.
It makes a lot of sense and certainly, reflects what we're seeing across the United States. Your organization, the Greater Milwaukee Committee, it's a great advocate for the region and myriad initiatives that are going on. Can you talk a little bit about which areas are keeping you busiest right now?
Well, we're still very focused in our economic development activities with the small business development through Scale Up and Spark, which are focused on, basically businesses 15 million and below, which have the opportunity for significant growth. But talent attraction is also a big area for us as well. While the pandemic has slowed hiring in certain areas, it's also created opportunities for hiring in others like tech and moving more and more business onto the virtual stage. So there's a lot of opportunity right now for the initiatives we're working on. And then, short term, we're continuing to work on vaccine rollout, issues of vaccine hesitancy, everything that's taking to sort of get us back to where we can have a full bore economy again.
Out of all of those, which ones are taking the most time right now? Are you trying to separate these equally with different people tasked with it?
Yeah, we have different people within the organization that manage the program side. I would say the vaccine rollout and some of the racial equity work is taking a lot of my time right now. Those are things that are dynamic. They're changing almost day to day. There are a lot of policymakers involved in the work. We have a lot of members that have high levels of interest. So it's a lot of engagement on those particular issues.
With the second one, are you engaging a lot of the corporate community as well as the civic leadership?
Right. Yeah. Especially with the vaccine rollout and the state, certainly, because, the state categories are important. Trying to figure out logistics when employers can start to vaccinate on site, what that looks like as new vaccines roll out. What is that going to do with availability? I mean, I think like many states, Wisconsin's sort of figuring out what's that structure look like to roll that out. How can the business community be supportive of that? And then the other piece is, how do we eventually get more vaccine?
I agree. I think it's something that's always going to be a work in progress, and hopefully it gets us back to whatever new normal looks like.
Right.
You mentioned talent attraction and retention being critical to success, not just for the region, but for every company out there, any growing enterprise, whether they're raising capital, making acquisitions, or even considering moving their operations to Milwaukee or the greater area. Talk about some of those initiatives that you're working with that you mentioned that are helping business owners and leaders kind of keep that regional talent pipeline filled.
Sure, I'm happy to. We've had a program called the Commons for probably about 7 years now, and it really is a great way to connect college students with local companies and the challenges that they face. It's really an internship cohort program that also involves a lot of critical thinking skills, some entrepreneurship, gives the students the opportunity to work with a corporation and and its staff on the key issues, real issues, as well as with colleges and universities. Students often gain college credit during it. But what we've seen coming out of that is sometimes employers, large employers, are changing some of the ways that they're hiring and they're recruiting college talent. We're able to add much more diversity to their ranks, and as well as linking college students up. Because when you think about it, when you grow up in your community, the brand name may mean something, but you don't know what that company does, and you don't know where you fit into it. And so this gives a hands-on opportunity for students to fit in a way that is very scalable for the corporation. And, we did a lot of work this summer when so many internships ended. We knew that the need for talent would continue beyond this pandemic, and scrambled, and Michael Husted, who's the head of the Commons, and his team and our board put together about $300,000 almost overnight to have 150 students participate in paid internships this summer. And we know they're going to remember that, and they're going to remember Milwaukee.
And hopefully that helps create a nice talent pipeline. As I talk to people across the United States, whether it is in biotech or in technology and IT, AI, they're always looking to make sure that they can get the right talent to move their companies there, when they make acquisitions to stay there, so that they're not trying to just import people.
Right.
Yeah, it can always be tough. It's great to hear that you're doing that. Let's talk a little bit about regional prosperity, which is another one of the areas that the Greater Milwaukee Committee helps advocate for. How are you and your team engaging currently with the business community to foster new ideas to continue that?
Well, I would say particularly on the regional side, many years ago, we were involved with the startup of Milwaukee 7, which has been, I think, a big success. But the talent attraction piece is a big regional one. The other thing we've worked with a lot has been the higher education community. So there are all of the higher eds in the county, in the 7 counties, have come together to form an organization called HERA, Higher Educational for Regional Alliance. They're heavily focused with the business community on where are going to be the next jobs, how do we get students in the right pipeline for those jobs, and how do we align those types of internships like the Commons and other work opportunities with students. So it's been a really exciting process, and the great thing is it's really been owned by the universities with support from the business community and the state.
What kind of changes did you have to make last year because of COVID and currently this year?
Oh, like everything, everything. All of our membership meetings went, of course, virtual. We also went from running 8 membership meetings a year to having almost, I think, 21 last year, just to make sure we got information out. And we always had good attendance. We have a membership of around 200, and we'll get 100 to 120 people on the webinar. But we also had to take all of our programming virtual and switch curriculum, figure that out. It was a fast learning curve. I think that going forward, the key is going to figure out, what do we keep from that? What did we learn from that? What's the value? And, and certainly then how do we balance that with the need to be in person and form those relationships?
Yeah, I think we're going to learn a lot about some of the best practices we've been able to engage through the use of primary technology like this. It's going to be interesting. So, you mentioned the scale up component of what you're doing with advocates and working with them. How are you engaging with that young CEO leadership in their young companies to ensure they're scaling up their companies the right way and able to connect and access the resources and expertise they need to grow?
Well, and actually, Elmer Moore runs Scale Up, and he and his team, that's what they spend a lot of their time on. It's a cohort model. So actually, the individuals that are in Spark and in Scale Up get a chance to get to know each other and form almost like a class that continues afterwards. And we've developed a lot of programming to keep people engaged, because while they go through the program and they reach a certain level, when they get to that next level, they still need that professional advice and support. And they need to have, I think, also just people to bounce ideas off of. So Scale Up's played a really important role in that. We've had 70 some companies go through Scale Up. All except one, I think, are still around, and they're still growing. And so a lot of work this past year has been How do you shift your marketplace? What do you need to change to exist in this virtual world? How do you survive with your cash going through this time period? What's your product mix look like? So it's been a fascinating time to sort of make this very, very fast pivot.
And we're looking forward to seeing some of those companies in future years be on some of our panels as they grow, raise more capital, and begin to make acquisitions. Finally, let me ask you this, Julia. What can business owners and leaders in this area expect to see as 2021 continues to unfold that they should be cognizant of as all of us are working together to build a stronger economy for the communities where we live and work here?
Well, I would say one thing. I think in Milwaukee, we have a fairly cohesive business community, one that's willing to share and collaborate. The need for that going forward is going to be still continue to be very important. I mean, I talked a little bit earlier about vaccine hesitancy, and we're seeing that with both different populations as well as, everybody from young women of childbearing ages to older adults to people of color that don't have a lot of trust always in the medical field. So I think the ability of the business community to engage in that discussion is going to be really important for us getting back to a full economy. And then I think also finding ways to continue to support sort of the things that bring the quality of life. I think there's been a lot of support of what are the basic structures of life, like housing and food. But, our performing arts are struggling right now. That creative side of Milwaukee, we don't want to lose that right now either. And so kind of keeping that balance as people are looking at their charitable giving and their support is going to be important.
I think that is well said. Julia, thank you so much for joining us today at the Dealmakers Conference. We really appreciate hearing what's going on.
Well, it's a pleasure to join you and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you, Julia. Ladies and gentlemen, we now invite you to join us in the main ballroom. We have today's keynote address with Austin Ramirez, second generation CEO of Husco International. He'll be discussing how executives can make impact with success and significance. See you there, and then back here later this afternoon.